All right, let's take a problem today for the state change community, where we have a manipulation we're trying to do here of let's take an object that has or an array, right, that has this has the square brackets here, and then basically is double nested, right? So you can see you've got the array which has leader inside, one key called leader. The leader in turn has this big object inside. And it seems clear that what's meant to happen is that this instead should just be an array that has an object. The object should have the properties ID, first name, surname, profile photo. And the next one should have just ID, first name, surname, profile photo. So what we basically need to do is unwrap this internal object and lift it so it just goes directly with the array itself, basically taking this leader part out of the middle. So let's talk about how we might do that here. And I do this, I made a little bit of a function, and you don't need to, but it's sort of what I did for illustration purposes. We're going to start with whatever the array is, and the array would basically be the equivalent of whatever this were looking like. And I made a little sample of that by saying, let's take an array, which will have, it'd be an array of objects, right? Each object only has an element A, although you could always call it leader. And each one of those has X and Y. And basically, the correct answer we want to come back with is going to be an array that just contains XY1, 2, and another one which has the members XY3, 4, without having these A's in the middle. So doing this kind of array surgery can be a little bit involved. This is essentially what's called a reducer pattern. Uh, oh, uh, could be done as a mapping pattern. But in Xano, they're kind of the same thing. You're going to create a variable. You're going to collect to make the new array, and I call this one output. I then iterate over this original array. And you do that with a for each loop, passing it the original array, and then the iterator variable itself is going to be called item. So item is going to be this object like you see here. It'll have one member called A, and the A in turn will have members X and Y, whatever. And then inside here, we're looking to pick off the contents of A. So I do that by creating something I'm calling child and saying it to item.a. And in Xano, that dot syntax means take the child of whatever the object was. In this case, this is child, remember this whole thing. And take the member at path, which is identified as A, which is here, and then pull its contents. So what item.a should do is produce all this stuff. You know what? Let's just confirm that does that. So we will use one of my favorite functions, stop and debug. And we will say, let's make it into, what am I looking for here? Looking for whatever child to be, right? Okay. So if I did this correctly, the child should be the 1 and the 2 here. So let's find out. Do run debug, run. Right. So now I get the object, which is the 1 and the 2, right? So it's unwrapped from the A. Having unwrapped it, we'll comment that for a second. Having unwrapped it, we now want to add it to the end of our output array. And by doing this, we clean, and our input might have been the original array that has the wrapping, but the output just gets this new version, not the A version, but just the XY version, added back to the output list. And then at the end, I'm returning this. So what should happen is I should be, it should iterate through. It should grab the first element, which is A, the X and the Y, grab just the X and the Y part, add the X and the Y part to the output variable, move around, grab the next A, grab the X and the Y, take the X and the Y part, put it into the output, and then we're done. So the correct result should be, I think, parallel to what, the original question is looking for, which is we should have or rather we should just have 2 objects in here, which contain the XY1, 2 and the XY3, 4. Let's see how it works. Boom, there we go. Let's see if we can extend this a bit. What if this thing didn't just contain X and Y? What if it also contained Z of 5? Right? Make sure there's comma here so it's properly formatted. I do this again. And you see it picks up the Z5 from the first one because it'll pick up everything that's underneath the A. In fact, even if I were to say, Q 9 R 10, you could pick up like, further complicated structures, right? But what it's done is the core unwrapping job that we needed it to do. We needed it to unwrap the A's and put in just whatever the children were. And this technique of setting up an output variable and then looping over it and then filling in the output variable is my preferred way of doing this. Now, if in the event you wanted to be like just editing whatever the original variable was, first, you can't do that with an input. So we would need to instead use it as a variable so that we could go to, demanipulation and create a variable. And I'm going to call the variable, we'll call it R, just like what the input is. And the value is going to be whatever the input R is. All right. And actually doesn't very matter what the order of these two things is. And then we could loop over um, the variable R, right? So remember, it doesn't have to have come from an input. It could just be from a variable, and that's fine. And then we can, and then just like before, we're just going to update output. But then what we can do at the end, which is kind of cool, is we can do demanipulation, we can do update variable, and we can say that we want to set R to whatever output is, right? That way at the end, we'll have edited the array variable itself based on this, the intermediate work that we have done here. In fact, this guy down below, right? So basically we'll have looped, and then update the variable. There are other, more specific surgical ways of doing this, where we could be looking at each position and like be editing the array variable in place. Again, only if it's a variable, doesn't work for inputs. But I think that those more fancy techniques can wait for another video. And I suspect, I hope at least, that this will help, the original questioner and anybody else who's looking at this have a sense of how we can do a little bit of array surgery and unwrap your objects in Xano.